I'm Jondrew from the official GonnaGeek.com show, a weekly geek news podcast that is a part of the GonnaGeek network, just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other awesome geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. Welcome to an all-new Better Podcasting live chat. I am the Canadian Jondrew, and with me, of course, is the American Stargate pioneer. Hey, SP!
Normally, I'd be ecstatic about you calling out my country, but I can only guess why you're poking fun at me tonight.
It's November 3rd, 2020, and that's someday that something happened in the States. I don't know. I'm Canadian. I don't follow all of that, but we are here on Better Podcasting to talk about podcasting in a sort of mostly unedited form. Sometimes we go and we record the first 15 minutes of the episode, realize we weren't recording, and decide to start all over. And sometimes we'll go and we'll do that. We'll lob that off right there and we'll start the show all over. And other times we'll just go and we'll stitch it together and post if that was to happen, because we've always got a backup going and we can always salvage the show in some form most of the time. But you don't know this if you don't attend live, because we do stream this show and the Better Podcasting main show on Tuesdays, usually at 5 p.m. Pacific. That's 8 p.m. Eastern at Geeks.Live. If you want to check us out when we record live, we'd love to have you over there. Chat with us in the chat room. Full disclosure, it's probably not going to have a lot of interaction with the chat room tonight because it is election day in America right now, and there's probably a lot of people focusing on that rather than here. But we got a bunch of fun topics, including Johnny Pennington is in the chat room today. So who knows what wacky podcast endeavors he'll tell us about there that we can relay to you. Johnny Pennington is full of wacky podcast endeavors.
I know. I'm looking forward to learning how many downloads he got in the first 30 days of his episode 1.
For sure. All right, let's start off with some gear talk. We love the gear talk here. And Stargate Pioneer, I know you wanted to quickly talk about some of the new podcast gear that came out in 2020. And I'm curious why you want to talk about this.
Well, I wanted to mention the fact that we have seen the most podcast gear be released in 2020, I think, since podcasting started. This is gear that was specifically made for podcasters. I guess you could say streamers, but largely podcasters in mind. Usually there's some sort of pod or podcast associated with either the title or the marketing. And just in the last couple of weeks, I think since we recorded last, the Shure MV7 microphone was released. And this is a version, not the Shure SM7B, but a version of the SM7B that it was designed to be able to use via USB and XLR. I actually don't know if you can use both at the same time, but it does have both capabilities, which is something that we have been promoting with the Samsung Q2U, the ATR 2100, and the AT 2005 for years. So that is good. We talked last episode about our PodTrack P4s and our Zoom ZDM1s. So those are both from Zoom. Zoom also came out this year and released the PodTrack P8. Earlier this year in January, I know a lot of people use small audio interfaces, so Audient Evo 4 was released in January. If you want to wind the clock slightly back further, I think in November 2019, sometime in late 2019, the Moto M2 was released, which is another 2-channel audio interface, but we won't count that for 2020. And then I would argue that this is not podcasting gear, but since there's a podcasting mode on it, I will mention it, the Zoom H8. So all of this gear has been released in 2020. This is a banner year for podcast gear. And I know we talked last year to some gear companies about some great things that could be coming in the next year or two. This is some of the stuff that we have released, and some of the other companies still have to release products like Mackie. We talked to them. I know we talked to the guys over at Focusrite last year as well, and they kind of have gear that's already position for streamers and podcasters. But all this new gear is great. I'm looking forward to what is coming forward next year. Probably won't be as much gear, but we're going to see more and more gear come out either for podcasters or streamers. And it's going to be at higher qualities than we've ever seen before. And it's just rocking. So maybe we'll get a Rodecaster Pro version 2 next year. I'm not going to buy the Rodecaster Pro as is. Maybe the version 2.
I'm telling you, they screwed up. They should have called it the Rodecaster, and then they could have come out next year with the Rodecaster Pro. They just screwed that completely up. I actually have been thinking a lot since our last episode there, where we talked a bit about the year in review and things like that, and just thinking a little bit about how the gear production probably was impacted by 2020. And then last night I was watching a live stream from a company called Habitat. Habitat makes a smart home hub. They're the hub that I use, and they're a fairly small company, but they do a lot of product. So they were pretty transparent. Like you almost got a little bit of inside dirt on how things have been affected by 2020 with production. And they were talking quite a bit about the slowdown that occurred in getting their next version of their hub out, just because of the fact that things going overseas was a nightmare compared to what they had forecast. It was more expensive. It was way more delayed. And as such, it caused a delay in the creation of their product. And it made me sort of wonder, how much did we see? How much of what we thought was going to come out in 2020 was just held up by companies going, no, it's just not feasible to create it. It's too expensive now. Or we need to change the product, or we'll lose our shirt on it.
Well, the Samsung Q9U is a good example of something that we expected to come out long before now in 2020. And who knows? It's not the end of 2020 yet. It might come out before the end of the year. But that's an example of something that hasn't hit the shelves yet. I think, though, that you have a bunch of guys from these gear companies, if they weren't completely laid off, they're at home. They're seeing all of this telework that still occurs, maybe not as much as it did in the April to June timeframe in 2020, but telework and social distance learning has become more and more of the norm. So I'm thinking there is going to be more of an acceptance for home streaming gear or home recording gear than there was before. So I think we're going to see some innovation come out because of that normally wouldn't have. Now, I have no idea if this gear is going to come out in 2021, 2022, or if it will ever hit the shelves, but I think some of it will, and some of it will be revolutionary, and I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting for sure. I also know that while we're talking about gear, you wanted to mention that you had a piece of gear on order, and I'm curious about where you're going to take this discussion. And it's all about your Palm Pilot you're going to order, right?
You know, I do have an older Palm Pilot. I should bring it to the show at some point. It's been a long time since it's turned out. I don't even know if it would work, even if plugged in. But no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that in just a couple of days, so it's Tuesday, in case you didn't catch that at the beginning of the show, it's Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020. In just a few short days, the Apple Store will open for pre-orders for a couple of their newer phones. They're already open for the iPhone 12 and the iPhone 12 Pro. On Friday, November 6th, they will open up for the iPhone 12 Pro Max and the iPhone, I think it's just mini. I don't think it's Pro Mini, right? I think it's just the iPhone 12 mini. So those go out for pre-order on Friday. I will be pre-ordering an iPhone 12 Pro Max, and that will replace my iPhone 8 Plus. I don't see too much revolutionary, especially with podcasting with this. Non-podcasting wise, I'm looking forward to the low light capability of the camera, which might do some interesting things for maybe some YouTube videos we do on GonnaGeek gear or whatever. But as far as podcasting, it'll just be the way I connect and stuff. I doubt I'll ever be podcasting through the phone, but I say that now. Who knows? 3 years from now, I might be doing it.
You are missing the mark here, Stargate Pioneer. I want you to take all of your production equipment, cameras, lights, video equipment that you've got. Throw it out, because Apple has been making a hard campaign on how the iPhone is just all you need for film level production. They've been selling that hard, not only at the release event, but afterwards. They've had a marketing campaign. So get rid of it all. SP, all you need is your wonderful iPhone.
I feel like you're taking a stab at me and you have no idea why, because right before this show, I was looking at my box of gear that I haven't delved into from this year yet. And it does include a ring light and then two new studio LED lights that I have purchased. They're just cheap ones. They're not like professional level ones, but they're ones that I was going to use either in the podcast studio or in my YouTube videos for gear. And you're just telling me to throw them out, and I haven't even used them yet. No, I'm not going to do that. But two, yes, the Apple marketing on the pro level phones seem to be exclusively towards the professional video producer or film producer. And okay, whatever. I just want the bigger screen.
I look forward to all your professional videos. While we're talking about
that
gear,
will never happen. Never.
In the chat, Johnny Pennington was bringing up some gear talk. He was saying the new Shure will record in USB in 16/44.1 and 24/48. Also to infinity and beyond in XLR mode. Liberty Dude said, in a world where the Blue Yeti is a go-to for many, ? Damien said, I think the P line is immediately replacing the H line for podcasters. I think that's a fair assessment. I think that they've really realized that, hey, a lot of podcasters have found ways to use our H line. Let's go ahead and give them their own thing and create a little bit of a divide. And truthfully, like, I think that my video on the L8 or the L12 is a great example on how Zoom needed to create that division, because while the L line is not the P nor the H, there's a lot of really good comments we've got on that video about the different camps. One like the podcaster camp is of one opinion, being like, well, this makes sense or this doesn't make sense. And then it's the complete opposite for the musician. And the musician's like, no, that's the way it's always worked in music. Like, it makes total sense. So, you know, it's funny, some of the contrasting opinions that are on there about certain features. And I think it's a great example on, while there is a lot of overlap, there are some very big differences between like podcast and broadcast use and musician use.
Yeah, what was one of the big things, I believe, I don't know if I'm saying the correct capability, but I want to say overdub, where you can over record onto an existing track.
Yeah, overdub was a big thing that like podcasters like myself didn't care at all about.
That would ruin it, actually.
And then musicians were all about it. Even simple things like the way that things are set to record on the like, you push the record button first and then you hit the play button. Musicians are like, yeah, it's the way it's always been. And a lot of podcasters like, well, that's stupid. That's 2 steps. Why would you do that? So I just thought that was worth a mention. Thanks, chat, for bringing that up. While we're sort of dabbling in the podcast / non-podcast territory, I want to mention a couple things that have come up in recent that I've discovered. Number one, just discovered this last night. Our co-host over on the GonnaGeek show, Chris Farrell, he decided while we were setting up for the show, he was going to read the release notes for OBS Ninja. That's the platform that we talked about a while ago that we've been using to connect for our video lately to create the show. OBS Ninja, he decided to read the latest release notes, and it mentioned that there was Caption.Ninja, which is a free closed captioning service. It's live captions. So if you go to Caption.Ninja, you select what input you want, and then all of a sudden it will start making captions for you. And overall, it's fairly accurate. There are a few inconsistencies that we've seen, but overall, I was pretty impressed with what I was seeing. Again, it's live captions only, but it might be something that people want to keep their eye on if they are wanting to make quick and dirty captions and you're able to just go and press play and run it through this for a while. I don't really know exactly how you extract this. I think you might be able to do like a Control A, Control C, Control V sort of thing. like to copy and paste. But at the least, I thought it was worth a mention, especially because I know we do have some video folks who do check out this show. And if you do go to betterpodcasting.com, you'll see, as I've been talking about this, I have had the captions on screen, and I'd love to know what the live audience is thinking of the captions that they're seeing on screen, whether they think it's impressive, meh, or a failure. Let us know what you think in the chat room there. For me, I'm pretty impressed considering it cost me the low price of opening a browser window.
Takes up a lot of screen space, though. I know.
I think we'll be able to do something with it with the right tools. I just made it show up in a quick and dirty manner. This is made by the same guy that has made OBS Ninja, which is a pet project, and he's done a ton of enhancements to OBS Ninja, even since we started doing it a couple months ago. So I'm pretty confident that caption.ninja, if it's not a huge resource, like drawn resources, I have a feeling he's going to enhance it and it's going to be even more versatile. And there's a few suggestions that I think he could easily implement that would make it even easier for my use. So, and actually because it's a browser window for video side of things, I think potentially I could probably use a plugin or two in Chrome to make some changes myself. The other thing that I wanted to mention as well, since we're talking about this OBS Ninja service, is I came across that something that they've added to OBS Ninja that plays into what we mentioned before when we talked about OBS Ninja. OBS Ninja is largely meant for people who are wanting to create video, but we did mention when we reviewed OBS Ninja that there was a potential to use it as just an audio connection if you wanted to use it instead of like Skype or something like that. Well, it looks like there is further enhancements coming in for people who are not using video. And I'll just do a little demonstration here for the video viewers and then explain what this is. I'm going to go ahead and let Stargate Pioneer talk for a moment about whatever he'd like, and then we'll explain what you're seeing on the screen.
If I wanted to use this, I would probably use this for something like like an Instagram from an audio only. So I could use it there where I could see the waveform as I'm talking. I mean, I'd probably want some sort of logo for the podcast, whether it's the actual podcast logo or another picture that depicts what's going on, like an episode specific picture for the episode in the background. But the waveform is pretty cool, and I do like it. But you know, if you're doing a video show, it should be the video show. If you're doing an audio show, you'll need something like that to promote on the social media. So
if you didn't catch what it was a waveform. Was all it was. It was a waveform as SP was talking, and I agree. I think there's a lot of enhancements that's needed for it. It's kind of dirty, but I thought it was worth a mention because it's showing that he's adding features in consideration of people who aren't using cameras. And again, this is a big pet project, so you need to know there's a whole bunch of risks that come when someone's doing like a pet project. And we've seen services that are paid come up and die and things like that. But it was interesting to me that he's making some changes to this considering people who aren't doing video. So I just thought that was worth a mention because we do have the majority of our audience not doing video shows. And so, you know, it's, I think, a good example that there is consideration happening for audio only. And I've been impressed with the connections that we've had on it, especially compared to Skype. So I think that it's worth a look at if you're willing to get a little technical. So even if it's just for a little discussion, a little call. SP, I wanted to mention something that came up in our Discord server here this past week. Okay. We had, actually, it was today, the day we're recording this, we had Yakko.org say, anyone else doing NaPodPoMo? I resurrected my solo show after being dormant since December 2018 to give it a shot again. Can you remind everybody what NaPodPoMo is other than a mouthful?
Basically, it is doing a podcast a day for the entire month of November. We talked about it last year on the Better Podcasting Show, and we gave some tips and tricks on how to do it. We didn't really run into it too much into the run-up of November this year. I did consider it briefly for myself, and then I thought, I have way too much going on, and I'm behind on several things already. I don't want to add something else to it. Eventually, I will do it, probably a short 3 to 5 minute show every day. I think anything more than that would just get too cumbersome for me. I mean, if I could stack episodes prior to November, maybe, but I think the whole intent behind NaPodPoMo is to actually record and produce a show a day in November. And it can be done for a lot of different reasons. It could be done just to enhance your creativity. I know a lot of writers' workshops start out by, write X number of words per day for a whole month, see where you get. So there's stuff like that, but it could legitimately be just to knock something out before the end of the year, because we're coming up on the end of the year. And if you're have a goal to do something before the end of the year, this would be a good way to do it. So there's lots of different reasons to do it, but basically it is a podcast a day for the entire month of November.
If you want to check this out on betterpodcasting.com, you can. It was episode 207, betterpodcasting.com/207. It was when we talked all about the concept of that. For me personally, I mentioned last year I was skeptical about the idea. I was worried that it would burn out hobbyists. Just talking hobbyists, since we are mostly address hobby podcasters. I was very skeptical about whether this was a good idea or a bad idea. With overall what we've heard with people this year, in combination with seeing NaPodPoMo last year cause some people to pod fade, I think it's, for most hobbyists, not a great idea to do this year, especially this year. I think that if you are not already setting your life running your life in a manner where you're podcasting or creating a podcast every day, I think it's a way too big of an undertaking. And I think that it sounds cool, it sounds fun, but by the end of the month, you'll have done yourself a disservice, especially this year.
I can go with that, and I can see where it could help a certain number of people. Most normal podcasters, I would know. The amount of people that I was kind of shocked, because there was a lot of people openly talking about it last year for a variety of different reasons, some of which is because we were covering it. We covered it on an episode of Better Podcasting. And I was kind of shocked at the amount of people that didn't make it. And I just kind of assumed everybody actually made it all the way through the month, but people were talking about it was so difficult, and especially with American Thanksgiving thrown in there and Black Friday and Cyber Monday and stuff like that. That last week of November, last 2 weeks in November, very difficult to do. So not everybody makes it through, but there are support groups for you if you want to make it through. And apparently there's several people doing it in the Better Podcasting family, so you can get support for that on our Better Podcasting Discord, which you can find at betterpodcasting.com/discord.
Just to acknowledge some of those people, Anthony from Capes on the Couch said he's doing a short form one take video on YouTube. Yakko.org said I'm limiting mine to single topic, 10 minutes long. And Damien said, I forgot it was a thing. I actually planned to do it this year, last year. So I don't know. Again, I don't know that I think that it's a wonderful idea. But hey, it's not my podcast. You're the podcaster making the podcast. You do the decisions that work for you. The next thing that I think we should talk about right now is your unsolicited email, and not the one that came when I signed you up to that receding hairline group. But no, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah, so this came out of the blue, and I'm just going to read the email. It was sent to my Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. Longbox Edition podcast, which, Stephen, can you remind me, when was the last episode of Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. Longbox Edition published? Do you happen to have that available anywhere because I'm pretty sure that it was 2017. I could be mistaken.
Yes.
But I'm pretty sure it was 2017.
It was
early.
August 28th, 2017 was the Marvel Comics report for February 8th, 2017. In this episode, Black Adam reviews Ms. Marvel 15 and Lab Rat Lauren reviews All New Wolverine number 17 and Inhumans vs. X-Men number 4. Check that out in the past.
So you're basically talking about a podcast that has pod faded.
Yes, pod faded, but by the true definition, which
yes,
one day there'll be a definition at podfade.com one day.
Right. I won't say the show is completely dead. I have every intention eventually at some point to bring it back, just not going to be right now. So there you go. Anyway, I got an email sent to that podcast and I'm just going to read it here. I'm not going to say who sent it, but I'm just going to read it. So I'm an actor / writer / producer of a feature film out now called I would love to come on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. Longbox Edition and discuss any topics you want. Is the typical romantic comedy where a slob meets a driven career woman and they swap bodies. Check it out on Rotten Tomatoes, Letterboxd, and IMDb for more information. Go to this Vimeo URL, which I'm not going to give. Click rent and apply code podcast to watch it. In 2020, played the 29th Woods Hole Film Festival, which is a legitimate film festival, by the way, and won Best Comedy Feature at the 53rd. It's what it says, 53rd, not 53rd, 53rd. World Best Houston, where was nominated for Best Actress and was nominated for Best Supporting Actress. It won Best Feature at Louisville's International Festival of Film, headed by Academy Governor Conrad Bachman, as well as the Oscar-qualifying Peachtree International Film Festival. Thank you. And he gives his name. Wow. I mean, great information here. I mean, there's all sorts of implications for that. And apparently it did pretty well. But whoever's doing the marketing for this, terrible. This
is I'm so glad you brought this up because, I know for sure I have ruined potential connections with different podcasters and different media creators because their emails have just read they have not lined up with the website that I've been running. And when I see that, I am very quick to dismiss it. In fact, we get emails all the time that are clearly spam, and we get some that are very spammy, but maybe there's something there that we actually might want to look into for a topic for this show here. And SP is always the one having to be well, let's talk about it a little bit more because I'm quick to just be this is ridiculous, delete. If you can't figure out what my show is or what my website is that you run, you don't deserve my time. And this one here is clearly just a mass marketing thing because they're not only mailing to a podcast that is pod faded, they're mailing to a podcast that would never, ever, ever have covered this to begin with because of the fact that wasn't the core content. So it's just you lose that credibility when you're doing things like this. And I have judged people before for sending spam and then later coming back with something that's not spam. And I've been wait a minute, that name sounds familiar. Type that in my email. Oh yeah, they were the ones that just did poor spam. Delete. So I think that people really need to think before they do mass mails like this because I don't know, it looks bad, but I guess at the end of the day, they're just batting numbers. That's all they're doing here.
I know. And if Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. Longbox Edition, which is a podcast on Marvel comic books that come out every week, if that podcast was maybe about independent films, maybe I'd be interested. Maybe I'd be ooh, how did they pick us? But no, it was just a mass email out to everybody. And I don't know how they went ahead and harvested the email addresses from this. Did maybe they pick a subcategory of film off of the Apple API or whatever, and they were able to get it. I don't know, but no, sorry, dude. I'm not going to have you on my podcast because, first of all, the podcast is not currently in production. Second of all, it doesn't fit the content. So, yeah.
And, yeah, you might have heard something unusual in that. And if not, then I chose not to bleep out their name. I might. We'll see how I feel. Rather than giving them recognition, we'll see how I feel in post. This is me talking to you, the listener, after the fact.
Okay.
Okay, let's talk about, speaking of beeps and noises and things like that, let's talk about the problem that you've been facing in recent, that some of our live audience on this and the GonnaGeek show have witnessed. And I mentioned it briefly in last week's episode of Better Podcasting. I kind of teased it because I was like, I'm pretty sure we're going to come back to this at some point. What's going on in your podcast setup over there, SP?
That's a great question. I don't know. So we're doing some troubleshooting here. I say I'm doing some troubleshooting here. I think Steven was about to jump through his screen a couple of times and be like, what is going on over there? So I've had some very distorted audio that's come out, and I have heard it through my recording, which I monitor through my Zoom H6. So that's very important to know, right? And then he's heard it from his end, and Chris has heard it from his end. So I know it's coming out of my mixer into my PC, and it's also coming out of my mixer and going to my Zoom H6 recorder. So it's kind of a bonus the way I have it set up, is I was able to diagnose it to it either being, it's something before basically it goes out from the mixer into the computer. So it could be anything from the microphone cable, the DBX286 that is attached to, or the Mackie Pro FX 16V2. So what I did is I created a trouble step process. So I was able to do some troubleshooting to find out where the distortion is coming from. So step one, since I have a 16 channel mixer, was simply to change the channel. Now, maybe I could have started with a chord, put in a new chord, but I thought, well, I have to order it. And if it comes, because I wanted to go to a higher quality chord just to make sure that that wasn't the issue. And I do have another chord that I could have thrown in there, but I was going to go to a higher quality chord. So I thought, let's just change the channel that it is on the mixer. And I think Steven is changing the channel on his TV, and it's not really working the way he projects it to be working on my audio. So that was step one. It seems to be working tonight. Steven, have you heard any audio distortion at all from the time we connected to now?
No. And I wanted to actually bring this up here for a second, because I think actually, and you briefly mentioned it, the first diagnosing situation that you had was hearing the noise and who heard the noise, because I think it's important that we actually look closer at where you are monitoring in your chain, because you've got your microphone into your DBX286, and then you have your DBX286 into your mixer, and then your mixer goes into your H6, and you listen through your H6, correct?
Yes, and I'm out through specifically Monsend 1 into my H6.
And the fact that you heard it and we heard it, and we were basically connected through the USB on your mixer, that tells us that it wasn't just the USB. Because if you didn't hear the noise and Chris and I had heard the noise, then potentially it was your computer or the mixer. But the fact that you're hearing it from the H6 is leaning towards it's something analog, because of the fact that your connection that you're hearing on the H6 is essentially an analog chain the whole way to the H6. There is the mixer in between, but the way that it works, that soundboard, it's pretty much analog connections going from your mic to the DBX, to the DBX, to the mixer, from the mixer to the H6 to your headphones.
Yeah, I mean, one could argue that the DBX286S is a digital component. It's a digital processor, but yeah, for the large part, it's analog in the input-output. I mean, it's input via XLR and it goes out via TRS, quarter-inch jack into the insert in the channel, not the insert, but the 1/4 inch input into the channel. So it was in channel 2. I switched it to channel 3. I haven't heard it yet. We'll see as we go forward. And if I've just isolated to that one channel, then it would be that one channel. The one thing that I didn't check before was to reseat the connections and give it a try again, because sometimes those connections get a little frayed over time, or maybe something's changed. Like, I've had a lot of work done in the podcast studio because of the great wall of water behind me that's still getting fixed even today. I don't get me started on how long that's taking. But the cord could have got jostled, so maybe try to just reseat the same cord. And by moving it from channel 2 to channel 3, I inherently did that. So maybe I'll move it back just to make sure that it wasn't a cord seating issue. And I'll leave it on channel 3 for a week or two just to make sure that that's good. And then I'll move it back to channel 2. And if I hear it then I know that channel 2 at least is wrong, is bad. It could be more channels than that, but definitely channel 2 would be bad. And then I can move it to channel 3. Now, channel 3 normally is reserved for microphone 2 in the studio. I do have 2 DBXs. So the second DBX traditionally has been going into channel 3. So I would be changing that. So anyway, the first step was to do that, but I had gone further in my planning, and I had thought about just getting the new cable. So that's the next thing down the list. The next thing, if needed, was to insert a new DBX 286S, which I'm very, very fortunate to have actually 3 DBX 286Ss in my studio. One is still new in the box. I have not used it for years, so I could go ahead and use that. And then the final step, if I was still hearing the issue, would be to replace the Mackie Pro FX 16V2, which we have talked about before, that I do want to go ahead and replace it and get another form of gear. It's just nothing is turning my handle right now to be able to use in my studio right now. Like I said earlier in the show, the Rodecaster Pro right now is not the way I want to go. Rodecaster Pro V2 might be the way. If they redo the L12, maybe that would be something, or the L20, maybe that would be something. But right now, none of it works the same as what I have right now, because I have a bunch of different things that come into that mixer, and just the way I use it, I need more capability than what the Rodecaster Pro or the L12 can give me right now.
Well, I hope that you find the solution sooner than later, because that's a frustrating thing. All right. One of the things that can also be frustrating, there's a segue, is when you got background noise. And in the past, we talked about a thing called RTX Voice. It's a utility that NVIDIA has made that it's basically meant to solve background noise in a live environment. That's the primary purpose. It's either solving something that's coming into your computer, like your microphone input, or the output. So like if you're playing a Zoom meeting or something like that, and someone's got noise in the background, that sort of thing. But we've talked about how, if you have the time, again, for real-time playback, you can use this to help your podcast. And I've saved one of SP's podcasts by using the RTX Voice. It was something that he had somebody that had a fan in the background. And so I was like, hey, let me give this a try. Let me run it through. And it was a significant difference between all the other tools that we had tried and RTX Voice. It was night and day difference. But I had mentioned that if you didn't have the RTX video card series and you had a GTX only, you had to do a bit of a workaround during the install. Now, I don't know if the current install right now is broken or not, but just for S's and G's, you can look up what that means. I thought on the weekend I would try to reinstall it, because I haven't installed it since I got my new computer. And I downloaded the utility and I installed it without any workaround. I just ran the install and it went. So I don't know if they've modified it and they've gone, okay, well, it obviously works better on RTX, but we know that there's certain levels of GTX video cards that it'll work well on, and we'll just go ahead and let you install it. Or again, the install is broken. But I thought I would at least mention that, because for me, there was no workaround needed. I just ran the install. And this is a great utility. I think if you have very troubling audio. And if you want to see the whole comparison we did, you can check that out at betterpodcasting.com. If you click on videos in the top right corner, you can scroll through, and a couple lines down, you'll see my NVIDIA RTX voice test, where I did a bunch of different tests with a bunch of background noise. I really do think that this could save somebody's podcast in very, very bad recording environments. SP, I know you had something else you wanted to mention as well, actually, so I'll turn it over to you here.
Okay. So we had some comments on our Discord about our last episode of regular Better Podcasting. And one of the things we talked about in the download section was the new podcast tags that are being adapted by some RSS feeds, but not all of them out there. And one of them is the podcast lock tag. And that's been put in specifically to protect your podcast from being repurposed in other places. I don't know exactly how it works. I should have had time to look into that in the last week or so. But Damien spoke up and he said, I think you guys are the first I've heard of the podcast lock tags. And this could be because some of the other podcasts about podcasting out there are affiliated with actual media hosts or RSS providers that have not adopted it yet. So they just probably haven't talked about it, and they might not ever actually implement it. I don't know, but we talked about it because it was something that a lot of people were concerned about pirated shows on other platforms like Anchor. One of the podcasts I've learned that has gotten pirated quite a bit has been the Joe Rogan Experience. And for those of you who might not know, Joe Rogan Experience went exclusive to Spotify. So all of a sudden the RSS feed isn't out there or whatever. Well, people have been capturing that audio, downloading it somehow, and then throwing it on Anchor and throwing it out there for everybody. Or maybe not just Anchor, maybe I don't know if it's been used elsewhere or not, but definitely I've heard of Anchor. So supposedly using the podcast lock tag will prevent that. Now here's the rub, and I don't know the technicalities of everything. If the Joe Rogan Experience is no longer an RSS fed podcast, would the podcast lock tag work on it? I don't know. So a lot that we don't know out there, but I'm interested to learn more eventually. It's not like I'm worried about pirating Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. or Better Podcasting or anything.
Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. Longbox edition.
I am worried about that getting pirated because obviously somebody thinks it's an ongoing show.
I think you hit it on the head. I have reservations about this whole lock tag. I think it sounds cool, but you nailed it. People are downloading it, Joe Rogan, and uploading it. Like, the lock tag does nothing for that. Piracy, people who want to pirate always find a way to circumvent these copyright protection methods. You've seen it in movies and TV for years and years and years. It doesn't matter what they create. Someone finds a way around it. It's just the way it works. And so I guess, I don't know, with the RSS feed being such a open concept, like, it's not like there's certain key regulatory bodies like there are with domains and things like that. I think that the lock tag just is going to be like an honor system type thing. And some will kind of pick it, will be okay with it and like respect it. And others will just be like, okay, I'm not going to bother. Who cares? It's causing an extra problem for my clients. I'll just ignore that. And then there's the other people who will willingly ignore the lock tag because they know they can get some money out of it. So I don't know. I think that it's a bunch of nothing. The lock tag myself.
It's an interesting first attempt, if anything else. And also, Damien also put in our Discord, since we were talking about just, people taking care of their shows, right? So Damien was talking about editing a show, and he said, something I did not expect to get in the way of my podcast editing. I actually care about football now, and I cannot edit our show and listen to the game at the same time. Now, I need to, because we're a worldwide show, I need to say American football, not soccer.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't really care about football, but I was wondering why he cared about football, and it's because the team that he cares about is actually doing good this year.
No,
So,
that's
okay.
not the case. I'm not.
Oh, that's what he said.
Oh, he didn't. He
did.
got defensive, and he said for the record that because he's a Seahawks fan, he said for the record they've done well the last few years. That's not why actually at all. He said. In fact, his exact words were, as I quickly pull it up because I didn't think SP was going to go there, so I specifically didn't put it in to our notes, and now I'm quickly trying to pull it up.
Well, I mean, it doesn't matter. It basically,
he said he's okay. You go ahead. You continue. Sorry.
Yeah, well, basically, he's saying he's being distracted by something else, which as hobby podcasters, we say you should have other interests outside of podcasting, and he can't edit the show, so it's impacting his edit time. And we talk about time management all the time.
Which is why I wanted to bring it in, because his exact words were, quote, "Hey, the Hawks have been playoff, if not Super Bowl contenders for the last 4 years, but I think the biggest change is that until last year, I was on nights, so I handled the editing at night mostly. I actually don't remember how the editing balance worked this time for me last year," end quote. And so this wasn't so much about football. It was about the fact that he did have another interest and his schedule basically clash. And that was exactly the point that I actually wanted to bring up when I put this in the document here, was that I do think that people need to allow themselves to have other hobbies because you are doing podcasting for fun. And if you don't have other hobbies or other interests, then it just becomes work. I've closed podcasts many times because they've become work. And it's not fun as a hobby podcaster. So I think that this is great. I think that it's great that you're challenged. And I think that you will find a great solution to this problem, Damien. I know you, and I'm pretty confident that you will. And you know what? Football's a limited thing right now. Who knows how long it'll continue? If you have a late week, here and there over the next little bit, don't make a habit of it. Your audience won't kill you.
I've got people in my office who are fervent fantasy football. They're not podcasters, but they're fervent football watchers because of fantasy football and because they like it, whatever. And they have all mentioned that they have stayed up late watching some games that they normally wouldn't have just because it's something to do and they enjoy it. So even non-podcasters are finding it as well. By the way, if you go to our live chat, which you can find at Geeks.Live, that's www.geeks.live, you can go ahead and ask us a question. And we had James Clark ask us a very interesting question. I don't think we've talked about this before. I don't think I've thought about this much before, but he asks, what's the worst mistake you ever made? And I'm going to limit it to podcasting because we're a show about podcasting. So what is the worst mistake, Stephen, you ever made in podcasting? Other than podcasting with me.
Yeah.
We'll just scratch that one off.
No, that's far down the list. Okay, this would take a lot of thought, and I'm not going to stand behind this answer 100%, but I will say off the top of my head, my biggest mistake. Okay, I'm going to say it and I'll argue why there was some good that came out of it. Was sticking with a podcast that I didn't like some of the buy-in that some of the hosts had, some of the back channel friction that was there, and some of the ways that certain situations were being handled. I thought that the podcast had a lot of potential, and so I stuck through it for that, and just because it was almost a loyalty thing. And in retrospect, I think I could have put that time to a lot better things, and I think that I associated myself in a situation that I didn't want to be associated with, and there were some things that I just wish that I never, I just ended and moved on from. So I think when I look at it, that would probably be one of the biggest mistakes. Now, where I say sometimes you can look at the silver linings, I don't know that the GonnaGeek show and the GonnaGeek network for that matter would have come up if I hadn't stuck it out, because I think if I had jumped off when I probably should have jumped off, I might not have made the connections with people like Chris Farrell. Perhaps not as much with people like, maybe not even people like, we've talked about him before a few times, a guy named Nightwing, which indirectly introduced me to SP. And, just some things like that. And so I don't know if I was like, yeah, if I had the time machine, and you do the whole fork in the road, what would have happened? What would the butterfly effect, whatever you want to say, the alternate 1985 on the diagram. I think potentially this wouldn't exist if that was the case. I don't know that if I was to map it out, if I would have actually ever gotten involved with Stargate Pioneer if I had jumped off of that show, because of the connections that I built towards the tail end of that show. And which like, if you look at the history of GonnaGeek came out of a project of mine because I had other interests I wanted to do. And so, I don't know, that could have been possibly spurred because of how I was feeling at the time. So I think potentially there was some good that came out of it, but I think that's probably the biggest mistake. I know that's a long-winded, vague rant / scenario.
That's an interesting. So I had a couple of things to say until you said that. So I want to address that. That's an interesting statement that you made. If you don't think you would have met me had you left that, because there was another channel which we could have met through, i.e. your brother. Potentially.
But, like I'm doing the whole like I said, the whole, you draw out the alternate 1985 line and
right.
Would the events have led to it? Right. That's
very interesting. I maybe, but that's interesting.
Sorry, throw that one out there.
No, that's nice and deep there. And yeah. So I have talked about it before on Better Podcasting, but I too have had co-host issues on another show, not related to Steven whatsoever. It was my own show. I had my own things going on in it. And I understand where Steven is coming from on that, saying it could have been the worst mistake that he made because of the other things that came about of it. So I will completely grant you that that is not what I'm thinking of my biggest mistake. My biggest mistake was on voice, just in podcasting, just from a tactical thing and somewhat strategic. Voices of Defiance. For those that don't know, I did it. It was a sci-fi podcast. It was specifically on the sci-fi show Defiance and the subsequent video game, which is now morphed into Defiance 2050. And so we had a podcast on it, me and two co-hosts. No issues with the co-hosts, still friends today. Matter of fact, I was just messaging them in the past couple of weeks on another issue, which I actually should bring up on this show. But one of the things that we did is we went ahead and interviewed the producer, the showrunner of Defiance. And if you're podcasting on a show, other than the stars of the show, which are very big names, which we did interview quite a few stars of Defiance on Voices of Defiance, the biggest get that you really can get for a review podcast or an after show podcast is the showrunner, the producer, because they're going to have all the answers to like the story ins and outs that you are discussing on a weekly basis. So we were set to interview him. And I had this great idea. I had just like upgraded my equipment or whatever. And I had this great idea that I could do a Skyposaurus and I could actually bring people through mix minuses on my older mixer, which was the Behringer 1622. I could bring people back in and out and actually do a video stream show, not the way we do Better Podcasting, not the way we do GonnaGeek. It was a multiple Skype show that we would be able to see each other. And I made the mistake of not ever having doing that before and setting it up like hours before, and everything was working, by the way, setting it up hours before the interview. My default was just to do the normal connection that we normally do, and that was no big deal. But I decided to be fancy about it, and it didn't work. I couldn't figure out why it couldn't work, but I spent way too much time. And it was just like 5 or 10 minutes, but I spent way too much time dealing with that. And it gave off the aura that it was not professional. I mean, I'm talking about the showrunner of a show on TV. It gave off the appearance that it wasn't professional. And I think it off-put him a little bit. And once we got going, everything was fine. And it was a phenomenal interview. But if I had any biggest mistake in podcasting, it would have been that 5 or 10 minutes of trying something new right before the biggest interview that I had ever done up to that point.
Yeah, I could see why that would stick in your mind there. Yeah.
Yeah.
A great question. I appreciate that. And, like I said, I'm not going to stand behind that as being my biggest mistake. We're thinking of that over, on the fly here. We very well could go and reflect on both of those and go, you know what? There was actually something worse. So potentially that could be a whole other set of things, or maybe it would be a ranking of mistakes, and there could be categories, and like, what's your biggest technical mistake? What's your biggest overall podcast, like individual series, like a podcast, or what's your biggest mistake internationally co-hosting with another Canadian? I mean, with a Canadian versus America. I don't know. Anyways, that was my attempt to do a little humor there. But seriously, I think it's a wonderful question, and thank you very much. And if you'd like to chat with us, whether we're doing this show or Better Podcasting proper, please, Tuesdays, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, we are usually live at Geeks.Live. And if you want to check out some of the other awesome content on the GonnaGeek Network, you can check that out at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. We do have several shows that do stream live, and maybe there will be more at some point. But check that out at Geeks.Live. And hey, come to our Discord at betterpodcasting.com/Discord. And it looks like as we're about to walk this out, we got one last question, which comes from Aldi's good Coper. I'll turn it over to Resident Reader to read this out.
What do you think of people like Logan Paul starting a podcast called Impulsive? A lot of famous vloggers and stuff are starting podcasts, which are not the best. What is your opinion on that? Actually, we talked about this quite extensively earlier this year with everybody, these professional, mostly TV shows that were forced to start recording from home. And we were both appalled by the lack of production and audio quality that was coming from these people's homes, whereas podcasters and a lot of streamers had that fixed quite a bit before. But Logan Paul, he's a celebrity. Other celebrities have done it. Some have been successful, some not. Ultimately, it depends on if their fandom are into hanging on every word they say, no matter what, or if they do some production. I'll give you an example on somebody that's doing some minor production, Brie Larson. So she plays Captain Marvel. She's done a bunch of different film roles throughout the year. She started a YouTube channel, which is not a podcast, but she started a YouTube channel, and it's actually pretty entertaining. And there is a purpose to each episode, and it's a story that's being told as you go through. She's not doing an instructional podcast or vlog or YouTube channel or whatever. So it can be captivating, no matter what you think of Brie Larson. It's a well done production. But if you get somebody else like Logan Paul, and I haven't heard his show, but if you get somebody else that is just talking to talk and the production value isn't there and their fandom doesn't get into it, then it's just not going to do well. So what are my thoughts on it? If it's somebody that I'm interested in and they're talking about something that I'm interested, I'll listen. But if it's somebody that I'm not interested in and something that I'm not interested in listening to, I have better things to do with my time.
I'll go out on a limb and I'll base it off of one of the main purposes of this show. I'll go ahead and say I'm cool with it, and that I think that it's fine and it's great almost, because they are trying a new medium for their audience, and some of these will translate and some of them won't. And the whole purpose of Better Podcasting is helping hobby podcasters grow their podcast. That means that in theory, if we are succeeding, you, our demographic here, will look back at your episodes and see a lot of regrets. And you will go, hey, I wish that I had done things differently, and you will grow. And so I I think reasonably we should allow these people the benefit of the doubt that they will either grow if their audience mandates it, or they'll stop. And their audience will either go, this is terrible, it's not meant for a podcast, I'm not going to listen. Or their audience will go, okay, this needs some improvement, and they'll grow. Or their audience will go, you know what? I don't care. For this content, this purpose, don't care about how it sounds. And so I guess I think that a lot of these people who are jumping in will probably improve with time. I can't think of it off the top of my head. It's a great question because I just saw a YouTuber that I follow this past weekend, and they mentioned starting a podcast, and I don't remember who it was, but I went, that's interesting because they had a very raw show, and I'm like, that's interesting that they're going to try to do a podcast. But they had mentioned a couple things about pumping the brakes and just sort of, getting the format together and things like that. And I thought, okay, that's good. They're recognizing that there's a bit of a difference. So I think that it's totally fine. And I think that these people should be allowed an opportunity to be able to grow. I think, though, it is worth judging, though, to a degree, and people should be vocal with their opinions if they think that it sucks in the current form, and they should provide that feedback to them. Like how when all of those broadcasters went and worked at home, and we said, your production value sucks. You are going from a huge production value show to being at home, and there are podcasters that are doing this for $100 worth of equipment better than you have done it. And those people should have heard that. And a lot of those productions did improve with time. In fact, I might be citing this wrong. Seth Meyers, he was one that I think as they started to transition back to the studio, he gave actually a special shout out to a YouTuber who created a video and said, hey, you people that are professionals, here are like 5 tips of why you suck and what you can do easily to be better. And so I think it was Seth Meyers acknowledged that they heard that feedback and improved as such. And so hopefully these people who might not be putting out good podcasts will improve with time. So I don't know. That's sort of my thoughts on it. And it's a crowded space. And if they want to try, they can try. But I think that it's something that anytime you see a big name coming into podcasting, us individuals, us hobbyists need to be aware that they've got a bigger name. And if they kind of tread in the same territory that you do, you're going to have to think about, is your audience going to be pulled towards that bigger name, or, are they going to overshadow you? I don't know. So I think it's interesting myself. Great question.
It's a great question. It's an interesting way to think about it. Absolutely.
So for episode 20 of Better Podcasting Live Chats, I'm Stephen Jondrew saying, hey, I am Canadian. I'll mention it again.
I'm SP. I hope you're having a great time. If you have any questions about podcasting, come to our Discord at GonnaGeek.com/Discord.
Bye.
Thanks for checking out another episode of Better Podcasting. You can find the full back catalog of Better Podcasting at betterpodcasting.com. If you're into geeky podcasts, please check out the other podcasts on the GonnaGeek Network at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. This show was produced and edited by Stephen Jondrew of GonnaGeek Productions. Voice work was done by L.W. Salinas. Thanks again for listening or watching, and we hope to see you again next week.